So in today's webinar, we will cover the event creation process, specifically as it relates to what we call normal events within Service. So we'll start off by defining what those are, along with a few other terms in the system, and then we'll dive into the process of actually creating a normal event, and some tips for those who are potentially newer to using the system, or even those who've been with us for a while and perhaps haven't seen some of the different features and tools that are available. So after reviewing that, we'll go through how to review and manage your opportunities, and we'll look at managing registrations and kind of touching on that list of registrants and engaging with those people. And then a couple of the related features like custom registration questions and opportunities stickers. So let's start off by defining some terms. In Service, we use the term opportunity as kind of an umbrella term to refer to any type of means that you might use to record activity from volunteers or to project availability and recruit volunteers into particular shifts. Now, if we click into adding a new opportunity, you'll see that there are 3 different opportunity types right off the bat. We have normal events, time slot events, and service projects. So there's a couple event types here, and then what we call service projects. And again, today we're going to focus on normal events, but I do want to briefly point out a couple things. First of all, if you do have a need for paid events where a volunteer pays a fee before they can join, please let us know. That is something that can be added on. Otherwise, these event types are really shift-based or kind of shift-driven. And you'll see with a normal event, right off the bat, we have a start date and time and an end date and time. So we're reflecting kind of when we need volunteers to arrive and when we expect them to leave. That's what these 2 times are pointing out. So again, this is really a shift. We have a vacancy, we need X number of volunteers to do this job at this date and time, and that's kind of what we're recruiting for. Time slot events are sort of an expansion on that concept. Perhaps we have 5 different positions happening, and I want volunteers to pick which of those 5 positions work best for them. So a time slot event is really kind of an expansion on the idea of a normal event. And then service projects are entirely different. Service projects are more like long-form activities. So if we go and create a service project, you'll see there's a date range, but there's no times associated with this. These are typically used to do things like, or to track things like long-term projects. Maybe you have volunteers who are operating as office aides, or perhaps you want interns to record their activity. Maybe you have a mentorship program or a coaching program or something where perhaps volunteers operate really independently and just report their hours back to you. Service projects can be used for a wide variety of different things. We do have a webinar recently that we went through service projects and kind of different use cases for those. So if you want to learn more about these, I'd encourage you to watch that. But today we're going to be focusing on normal events. So when you go to create an event, that is kind of the first thing that's selected. And the term normal event in Service could maybe also be replaced with the term special event. A lot of times that's what these wind up representing. But the idea is I have an event with a particular name that's happening at a particular date and time, and I need a certain number of volunteers to fill that position. So it's essentially one shift. Now maybe you parse out jobs or roles as people arrive, but the idea is that we are posting one particular shift and then allowing volunteers to sign up for that position or that event. So let's walk through kind of creating a normal event start to finish, at least what you need to get something basic moving. And then we'll look at some of the tools to modify this process a little bit, or some kind of tips and tricks for different things that you might need to do. A lot of this is really straightforward. If we look at the first thing here, it's the name of the opportunity. This is also the first thing your volunteers will see. And once they click on that name, they'll be brought to your description section. The description section, from my point of view, is kind of the most tedious thing to create because this requires so much copy. This is where we are defining what volunteers should expect and what they should bring and what they should wear. In fact, a lot of times I recommend creating kind of like a template for yourself where you have those different sections defined. So you might have a header that says what to expect, and then maybe another one that says what to bring, right? And then you could create for yourself actually in this section kind of a template, right? We could go in and create these little headers. We could have some other text in there that kind of defines what we're looking for. But you'll notice down at the bottom of this box, there are options to save field content, load field content, or delete field content. You'll see a trio of icons like this throughout Service. What we're doing essentially is creating a template for ourselves. So we can go in here and click on Save Field Content, give this a title, and call this, our normal event template. So I could give it a name, save the field content, and now whenever I want to reuse this idea, when I start a new event, I can just go in here and click on Load Field Content, pick from the list, and then load that up. So this is something I'd encourage you to do if you haven't already. It allows you to really normalize the way your events are displayed to volunteers and how you're recruiting volunteers. That way they kind of can learn to expect certain things from the event description section, and you can make sure to communicate that stuff to your volunteers efficiently. Now, before we get too far into this, I want to point something out. We're looking at this from the point of view that we're creating a brand new event from scratch, but a lot of times it's more efficient for you to just make a copy of a previous event, especially if it's something similar to what you're thinking about building out now, or if it's something you've already done in the past and you just need a new version of that. So we don't always have to create a new event. We'll look at the duplicate tool a little bit later, but bear that in mind. If you have something similar that you've done in the past, you do not always have to recreate the wheel. A lot of times you can make a copy of a past event and then just work within that copy. Okay, so that's that description section. Again, this is a very highly visible section. There's one final thing I want to point out about this. You do have the option to manage the source code for this, which is basically just the HTML. So something in particular that you might do sometimes is, embed a video. Perhaps you have a training video that you want volunteers to review before they register for this event. Well, you could plug that in here. So this is just HTML, but you could go to YouTube and grab the iframe for that video, plug it in here, and then have volunteers, watch that before they register for an event. Otherwise, there's a lot of other formatting options in here if you're just trying to, lay out the information. Okay, we have our start date and time and end date and time below that. I already kind of alluded to this. The way you should think about these two is, when do I want volunteers to arrive and when do I want them to leave? That's what these two should reflect. So generally speaking, a normal event should occur on the same date, unless you happen to have an event that goes over into the next day and people are actually staying through the night, or it ends really late or something like that. There are very limited use cases where you want a normal event that extends longer than a day. It is possible to do that, but generally speaking, that might normally be a service project instead. If you have anything that's kind of in that realm and you're not sure, should this be a normal event? Should this be a service project? Please ask. We are more than happy to help. Okay, one thing I want to point out about the end date and time, and the start date and time really, is this also controls kind of availability for registrations. If you publish your event, which we're going to talk about that more in a second, but if you publish your event, your volunteers will be able to register up until the start time of the event. A volunteer can't register for something that has already begun unless they're doing a walk-in registration through the sign-in console. So that start time does control that. And the end time also controls when the system will take this down. If you've published an event and it has already happened, you don't really need volunteers to see that anymore, so the system will automatically take it down after the end time has passed. There's a bit of a buffer there, but that will happen automatically, and you generally don't need to think about that. Now, I do want to point out, of course, all of this stuff can be modified after the fact. If you need to go in and edit the list of attendees, you can always do that, even if the end time has passed. We're talking about volunteers seeing the event on your event listing page and trying to sign up for something that might have already happened, right? The system won't let them do that. Okay, below this, we have your credit hours. So this is how many hours this particular shift is worth. Now, typically, this will represent exactly how long the event is, right? If we have an event from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., then I would want my credit hours to be 3 credit hours, because that's how long the event is. If this is 3.5 hours long because it ends at 4:30, then I would want 3.5 in my credit hours. So normally you'll want these things to match up. Bear in mind, this is recorded in hours, not in minutes. But this doesn't have to match up. Maybe we have a built-in break. Maybe this particular task is grueling and I want to give volunteers extra credit. You can dictate how many credit hours an event is worth. It does not have to align with the length of the event, but obviously, typically you might do that. Okay, the next thing here is the number of volunteers needed. This is how many people you can take for this event. Think about this as a capacity. If you do have a limit here, let's say we can take 25 people, that's the number we put in here. If this limit gets reached, the system will close registrations. So volunteers can still see the event online, but they wouldn't be able to register for it unless someone else canceled. Now, if you've kind of looked ahead here, you'll see there's an option for a wait list. So if you want to, you can allow a wait list. And that basically means if the event is full, a waitlist will open up instead, and volunteers can sign up for the waitlist. And if a volunteer is registering for the waitlist, they will be able to see how many other people are already on the waitlist ahead of them, so they can get an idea of kind of their position. And then the waitlist will function kind of exactly like you might expect. If a volunteer cancels their registration, the system will take the first person from the waitlist and add them to the event, and they'll get a confirmation message as soon as they're added. If they need to cancel, they can do that through that email, and then it would just go to the next person on the list. The waitlist also gets activated if you happen to go in here and change the number of spots available to increase that. Maybe you have a ton of people on the waitlist and you think, well, we could take a few more. You could go in here and update the number of volunteers needed, and if the waitlist is active and there are people on the waitlist, they will get added immediately, and they'll get a confirmation message right away. You can freeze the waitlist from the admin side, so you can disable the waitlist temporarily. This actually preserves the people who are on the waitlist. If you need to go and adjust things, maybe increase the number and add a group of people in ahead of the waitlisted volunteers, and then re-enable the waitlist, you can do that. You can also just control what order people are on the wait list, but you do have control over this entirely. Okay, the next item here is your organizer. Think of this as the point of contact for the event. This is typically going to be you, although you might have someone else on staff or a volunteer who's the point of contact for this event, and you could always list that person here instead. This person does have to have high enough access in service. So if you search for an individual and you don't see them, that either means they do not have an account or they don't have high enough access. And what I mean by that is they must have at least event leader access to the system. They don't have to be an administrator. If they just have event leader access, then when you list them here, they will be able to see who's registered for their event. They can add people to the event, remove people from the event. They can send emails to the attendees. But apart from that, they're basically a point of contact. You can give this person more access. If we jump ahead here a bit, there's a section called Additional Organizer Options. And in here, you can allow the organizer to modify opportunity details. Right? If you're setting yourself as the contact, it's kind of irrelevant. You're an admin, you can already do that. But if it's someone with event leader access, then this would allow that person to actually change the event. So if you want them to control the description or edit the times or the location, right, you could give them that permission. And then the organizer can also receive notifications of registrations or cancellations. That's also an option. So there is a secondary organizer. They are functionally the same, but only the primary organizer will have their contact information listed on the event by default. Okay, the next big component here is your location and location address. The reason we have two fields for this in Service, the first is used as the name of the location. The second is used as the physical address. So street address is typically what you might put in here, but you can really put anything in that Google Maps will interact with. So cross streets, GPS coordinates, however you would send someone to this location is what you might put in here. And if you're doing a street address, I would include the city and state just because sometimes the same street address exists in different cities or different states or even countries. So you'll want to put kind of, the information you would use to actually send people to that location in Google Maps, because this will query Google to create a map for your volunteers. And you can even use this to create like a map view of your events. I just want to briefly show this. If you'd like to, you can send volunteers to a page that displays sort of a map with your events. This is using that location address. Okay, we're going to skip over some of these things here today, but I want to point out we have webinars on a lot of these subjects, like the sign-in console. So mobile sign-in here is the idea that a volunteer is using their own phone to sign in for a shift. If you want to learn more about this, again, we have a webinar on the sign-in console as a whole, and this talks through all of these options in here as well. So we're not necessarily going to talk about that too much today. Below that, we have reminder emails. These are exactly what they sound like. If a volunteer registers for an event, they get a confirmation message, pretty straightforward. The reminder email is basically the same thing, except a different intro paragraph. So instead of saying, thanks for registering, it says, don't forget you have this upcoming event. Now you can control what that paragraph says. It's in your system configuration, but these emails are sent, 1 to 7 days or 2, 3, or 4 weeks ahead of time. I often see people configure this with 1 day and 7 days prior. These are both the exact same email. It's just if you want multiple copies of it sent out. There's also a reminder text message option. Now you won't see this if you don't have texting enabled in your platform. If you have questions about that, please ask. Again, we have a webinar on this subject as well. But if you would like to send out a reminder text message, it's kind of like a truncated version of that reminder email with all the relevant information, because it's a text message, so there's a higher or a lower character limit. But this would just go out, X number of days beforehand as well. Next is interest categories. Now in Service, interest categories kind of function like folders for your events. So you can define what something is a part of. So if you have questions about what these are supposed to represent or kind of how to create this structure, please ask. But typically these categories represent things like what programs you offer or what departments you're operating out of, or perhaps what locations you operate out of as well. And again, these essentially function like folders. So if I'm creating an event, I would select what program it's a part of. And then in my system, I also choose what location it's at. And then I can report on either of those components independently or together. I can also create filtered landing pages based on that information as well. Okay, a couple more things here when we're just kind of creating a basic normal event. We have this option for quick reg. Quick reg isn't something that I would necessarily use all of the time, but in certain circumstances, it's very helpful. If you are creating an event that's perhaps more of like a large-scale recruiting event, these might not wind up being regular volunteers, and I don't necessarily want as much information from these people, that's when quick reg can be useful. It utilizes a truncated version of your application, so your volunteers who sign up for this event wouldn't be giving you as much contact information or as much data on their profile. And then it also can't deploy restrictions in the same way. So again, it's better for like large-scale recruiting, but I wouldn't necessarily use it all of the time. There are, of course, exceptions to that. The last two things here are opportunity status and publish online. The status is not something that you typically need to edit. Service will take care of this for you. When you post a new event, it's going to be listed as open. Once the end time passes, that'll get closed out. So that kind of happens automatically. You typically don't need to make changes in there. The publish online status, however, is something that you do want to control. This is how we tell the event whether or not we want this to be available online. And there's good use cases for not publishing an event. But if this is something that you want to be made publicly available and allow volunteers to register for it, you want to choose Yes Open here. This is what allows volunteers to see the event online and then go and sign up for it themselves, depending on if they meet the restrictions that are in place. So again, there's other options in here. Yes closed, yes canceled, coming soon, contact us. These will publish the event, but they do not allow volunteers to sign up themselves. So if you want to create something that volunteers can see, but they can't necessarily register for themselves, you can do that. And then there's the other option of no for publish online, which means this is not published, but I can still send out a private invite. And we're going to look at that link in a little bit here. This is a really useful tool, especially if you're creating things like private events for corporate partners or for groups that are working with you. You can go through and create an event, not publish it, and then send them an invite that allows them to see the event and sign up for it without necessarily your general volunteer base seeing it. Now, there's one other component to publishing an event online I want to point out. Sometimes you might run into a scenario where you do want to publish an event, but at a particular date and time. So what we can do is set this publish online to yes open. And then under the advanced options section, when you're creating an event, there's a setting in here that says scheduled posting date. This will always default to this morning at 12:05 a.m. So if you publish the event, it goes live immediately. But we could also post date this. Maybe I have told volunteers, hey, this event is going live for signups on Friday. I could go and set that as the scheduled posting date. I can even specify a particular hour to have that go live. And then the system will withhold the event until this scheduled posting date passes. Now, how this event gets withheld is based on a global setting in your system configuration. You can either have your events withheld by hiding them until the scheduled posting date and time, or you can have them posted as coming soon, and then they'll flip to open once the scheduled posting date and time passes. So again, that's a global setting in your system configuration. If you have not changed that, it is likely still the default, which is that they will be posted as coming soon. So just actually to show you where that setting is, we can step away from the creating an event here real quick. Under System Management, if you go into Edit System Configuration, there's a section called Opportunity Management Settings. And in here, you can display opportunities with an upcoming scheduled posting date as, again, either coming soon or hidden. Okay. So what we just walked through is really kind of all you need to create a basic event and have your volunteers start signing up for it. You don't necessarily need to do anything else, but there are a couple kind of accoutrements that I want to point out that sometimes can be overlooked that may be useful to you. So one thing is restrictions. If you have an event that has limitations, like I can only take volunteers who've passed a background check or who are within this age range, then you'll want to set restrictions on that event. The way restrictions work in Service is you select who is permitted to register rather than who is prevented from registering. And there is one exception to that. We'll talk about that. But generally speaking, if I can take volunteers who are 18 and up, who've passed a background check, that is exactly what I would put in this section. So for my age range, I would put 18 to, let's say, 150. This is the default end age, if you ever see that in the system. And then if I want people who've passed a background check, then I would select yes, passed. So again, I'm choosing who is allowed to register for the event. Now you can actually create a group in the system that you disallow from certain events. You'll notice with group restrictions, there is an option that says volunteers assigned to any, all, or none of the selected groups will be allowed to register. So I could create a group called like a restricted or red flag or something like that, that is like a private group that I don't display to volunteers, and maybe I just add certain people to it. You could use that group to say don't allow, right? None of the people from this group are allowed to register for this event. So that is an option with groups. Otherwise, the rest of the restrictions, you're choosing who is allowed to register. So with checklist items, it would be people who have completed this checklist item. Or with a custom field or with background checks, it's a certain answer. So very commonly, I do see people asking a question like, are you completing court-ordered community service hours? Yes or no? And then maybe restricting based on that. So this event does not allow people who are completing court-ordered community service hours. Or perhaps it only allows them after they've been approved. So this is a pretty common restriction set that I see. If you do work a lot with court-ordered volunteers and you have questions about this, obviously please ask away. But also we did a webinar relatively recently on court-ordered volunteers and kind of working with them, kind of talked through this type of restriction set and different ways to engage working with that type of volunteer. Okay, so these are your restrictions. One thing I want to point out in here in particular, apart from age restrictions, Service is not going to tell a volunteer why they were not able to register for an event. There's a generic failure message that just says, thanks for your interest, you don't meet the requirements. And that's because this could be sensitive information, right? You don't necessarily want the system to tell a volunteer, hey, you didn't pass your background check. So what I typically recommend doing is editing that failure message on your event. If we scroll down to the bottom of this section, there's an option in here that says registration restriction failure message, and you can basically set up your own custom failure message for this particular event. So in my case, I said 18 and up who've passed a background check. So I might want to allude to the background check in this failure message, because if someone was not able to register, that means they either haven't had a background check completed or they didn't pass their background check. So I might have the failure message say something like, this event requires that you've passed a background check. If you think that you have, or if you've not had one completed, contact so-and-so to get that started. So I just typically like to edit this message to make it basically give volunteers something to do rather than saying thanks but no thanks, which is kind of like the default stance for that. Okay, one final thing regarding restrictions is that you can allow volunteers to override restrictions if you send them either the direct registration code for this event, think of that like the private invite to this event, or if you have a reservation in place. So this would be more the context of like a group. So maybe you normally require that volunteers attend your orientation, and that is a hard, fast restriction in the system. But if a group is signing up for this event, it's enough if I train the group contact and kind of let them disseminate that information. So I want the groups who register for this event to be able to supersede the restriction when they use a reservation code, right? That's kind of the context for this type of thing. Okay, we are not going to walk through all of the advanced options right now. There are a lot of settings in here and features and different things that you can utilize. But I do want to point out one thing in particular, and that would be up towards the top, these opportunity tags. So in Service, you can use opportunity tags to identify information about the event, either internally or externally, right? Like I might say this event is wheelchair accessible, and in my system, when I tag an event as wheelchair accessible, it actually adds this sticker to that event. So this is a way for you to add some iconography to your events and allow volunteers to see information a little bit more visually rather than having to read everything. And then these can also be used as a filtering tool. Volunteers can actually click on stickers like this themselves and filter your events using that language or that kind of idea. Or you can create pre-filtered pages. Like I have a button in my embed example that says family friendly, and if someone clicks on that, it filters by that particular sticker, and they can see all the events that have that icon. So all of that is really based on the back of tags, and then you can add stickers to those tags. We'll look at this here in a moment. Okay, so this is, again, creating an event. Now, once you create an opportunity in Service, you'll see a notification that says it was successfully created, and you can click a button in there to go straight to managing your events. But if you're going into the platform to go and look at existing events, you'll do that under Opportunity Management. Click on Search and Manage Existing Opportunities. And in here, this page will default to displaying all of your open opportunities. So again, that's things that are upcoming or ongoing. If something has already occurred, like you had an event yesterday and you want to go and view the registrations and maybe make some changes or do different emails or things like that, right? You won't see that initially on this page. You would need to search for it either by name, or you can click here to show closed opportunities. There's a quick search for that. And there's a bunch of other searching options as well. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for, what you might normally do. Personally, if I know the name of the event, I typically just search by the name of it. Unless it was like the most recent event, then sometimes clicking show closed opportunities is, more efficient. Okay, but on this page, as you're looking at your events, if you click on the name of an event, that'll take you to sort of like a main menu for it, same as the leftmost icon. But one thing that I want to point out in particular is managing registrations. So there's a shortcut to get to this option. But we will also see it if we click on the name of an event. In here, we can go through and view the registered volunteers or groups. If we click on that, it takes us to sort of like your roster, right? So now I'm looking at all the people who are registered for this event. If I want to see when they were registered, or perhaps even sort by that, you can use this icon at the top of the page, this calendar icon. You can click on that and it will sort by the registration time. And if you mouse over that, it will tell you when this person was registered and by whom. So you can actually see if they signed themselves up, or if someone else on staff signed them up, or perhaps a family member. You can kind of get that context directly on this page. But at the top of this page, you can register someone for the event. Of course, we can remove people from here. If I need to remove any registrations, I can do that. I can also send emails from this page or send text messages if you have that enabled. You can also send the confirmation email. This is something important to note. As a general rule of thumb in Service, when you're operating as an administrator, nothing that you do is sending notifications to volunteers unless you're clicking a button that actually says send email. So if, for example, I register a volunteer for this event, that person will not be notified, right? So they are not going to get a notification unless I choose to select that registration and then send them the confirmation email. So that's something that's very important to note. There's two options for sending this confirmation email, the automatic version versus the manual version. They are both the same content, but the manual version allows you to view it and perhaps make changes to it before you send it out. If you just want to send it straight away or for multiple people at once, use the automatic version. Okay, a couple things here. You might have seen when I registered someone for this event, it popped up a question. Do you speak Spanish? Yes or no? That is what's called a custom registration question. And those are things you can deploy on any opportunity. And they are on top of your additional or your standard application information. So if you have a special event and you need to ask volunteers as they are registering, are you able to do this thing, or have you done this thing, or even did you watch the training video? I kind of alluded to adding a video to the description of your event. You can ask those questions while someone is registering for an event using custom registration questions. These are tied to every event independently. So if you create a question for a specific event, right? This Zoo Wings event that I have here asks volunteers, do you speak Spanish? And actually this has a required answer of yes. Someone has to say yes to that, or else they can't register for this event. So you can do required answers like that, or you can just ask for information. But this question is only deployed where I select it. So for this particular event, I have selected it, but you can see there's other questions in my system that I'm not using on this event. So these can be used in a wide variety of ways. This is a really helpful tool. We do have a webinar kind of running through this as well. But they're basically a way for you to ask event-specific questions from volunteers as they're registering for that opportunity. You can see kind of a funny example here of like a name of a dish or what type of dish. If you're doing something like a potluck type event, or perhaps people are bringing food for a family or feeding a group of people or something like that, you want to ask them, what are you bringing, or what's the name of the dish? You can ask questions like that when they register. And actually in that particular example in my system, I also display that data publicly. So when someone is registering for this event, if they want to, they can click to view who's registered ahead of them and what their answers were to those questions. So this could be kind of collaborative, even if the person who's signing up doesn't know, who registered ahead of them. So these questions can be used pretty widely. There's a lot of different ways to utilize them. The main point is that they are only deployed on certain opportunities when you choose to select that. So every event has this option here for custom registration questions. And if you want to make a new one, go into Manage Registration Question Inventory, and you can build that out through here. Okay, there's one final thing that I want to talk about today, and that is basically directing volunteers to sign up for an event using a private invite. And actually, sorry, before we get into that, I had alluded to stickers, and I didn't show you where those are edited. Again, we have a webinar that kind of runs through all this all together. So if you want more information about that, kind of ideas of how to use these, that would be a good place to start. But I did mention this. So if you create a tag for an event, all of those tags are visible in the tag cloud. And if we click into that, you can see all the tags that were created previously. And if you want to add a sticker to any of these, you can use this option here to apply a tag sticker. You give it a friendly name or a display name. This will show up to your volunteers, and then you choose what icon to use. There are a ton of options in here, but if you have any questions about these or any suggestions, let us know. Okay, so the last thing here is inviting volunteers to sign up for an event with a private invite link. It's actually a very common use case for normal events. Perhaps you're working with a corporate partner, a school group, a church, and they are doing something that's unique to them, and no other volunteers are really invited to this. You don't want this event displayed publicly. Again, what you would do in that scenario is we would make sure that the publish online option is set to no, and then we can send out what's called the private registration code or private registration code link. There's also an email associated with this. There are several places where you can grab this link. Obviously, we can see it here. When I'm editing the event, I can just click on that link icon and grab that through here. There's little copy icons to copy that to your clipboard. There's a long form and short form for both of these, or for every event. They both do the exact same thing. Just kind of depends on what you're doing with the link, which one you might use. So we can grab that when we're editing the event, but you will also see that when you are managing an event. So on this main menu for an event, down at the bottom, there's this private registration code link. And if I click on that, that gives us those same link options. Now there's, again, options to copy the link out, but if you are doing something like creating a flyer or creating a poster, you can also create QR codes and copy those from there as well. Okay, so that private invite, if we go to that link actually, it essentially just goes directly to the registration page for that event. So even if the event is not posted publicly, you can send that out and have people sign up for your event using that private invite. So one last thing about that, there is another version called the direct opportunity link. This is another link. It's very similar in function. This will have people register directly for this event, but this link will only function if the event is posted publicly. So if the event's not posted, you actually can't click on this. You'd want to send out the private registration code link anyway. Okay, and then also, I mentioned this, but I want to show it. There is a private registration code invitation email. So this is just a prefabricated email that contains the data about the event that we're in. And then also down at the bottom, instructions on how to register using that private invite link. So of course you could just load this email up, add someone's email in. Whether or not they have an account in the system, you could just write an email address in here and then send it out. Or you can look them up. If they do have a profile, you can search for them by name and then click to add them in and then send that email out. Okay, so we went through kind of a lot of data today regarding, creating different types and specifically normal events and kind of a lot of the features associated with generally setting up an event. There's a lot of different use cases for normal events and why you might set those up. So if you do have questions about your use cases or particular events that you have in mind, please feel free to write in and ask those questions now. But we are kind of wrapped up with what we were going to run through here today. There's a lot of different use cases here for normal events in terms of creating private events for volunteers or creating something that you're just recruiting for on an irregular basis. I do want to point out, I mentioned at the top that there are other types of opportunities in Service, and we've done webinars on those subjects. So if you want to learn more about time slot events, for example, or like the use case of creating like a recurring event, right? This is an example of that in my system. I have an event that happens on a regular basis. This is a pretty easy thing to build out as well. So if you have questions about that or how to create that type of opportunity, again, I would refer you to our YouTube channel. We have a webinar on creating time slot events that kind of runs through like creating recurring shifts as a whole. We have like a short form video on that, but then also basically building out time slot events and different use cases for those. So this is a good resource for that. And then we also recently did a webinar on service projects and different ways to utilize service projects as well. So those would be good resources if you want to learn more about those different types of opportunities and how to utilize those. And then some of the other things that we talked about too, like stickers and adding those to your events. If you want to learn more about that, please ask away. The other resource that I wanted to point out to you before we go here is at the bottom of the page, whenever you're logged into the system, there's this need help button, and you can use that to engage with our customer support team. They are very responsive. They'll get back to you right away. But when you initially click on this, it says, how can we help? And this is just asking you for a subject. And the reason it's asking is to show you articles that relate to it. So let's say we do want to learn more about time slot events. I could search for that term. We'll see articles that have to do with that. If you like to have written instructions that just kind of walk you through certain things, this is a really good resource. Personally, I typically prefer to pop these articles out. I think they're easier to view as a separate page. But you can do whatever you want to within there. Regardless if you found an article that's useful to you or that you want to read through, you can always click on Contact Us and then submit a ticket to our customer support team through there. All right, well, if you do have more questions, please continue to write those in. We'll leave this open for a minute here in case anyone has anything that's still working through. But thank you for joining us today. Thanks for kind of running through a particular type of opportunity in the system. We are grateful that you join these and want to learn more about the system, and we want to help you in any ways that we can. So as you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. But I thank you for your time today and look forward to chatting with you again in the next month.